August 2021. I had just moved into a small craftsman-style cottage in a coastal town in Oregon. I was 26 at the time, working as a junior architect, and I'd spent nearly every penny of my savings on the down payment. The house was older, built in the 1940s, but it had been well maintained, or at least that's what the inspector told me. I was 3 days into unpacking when I found the first sign that I wasn't as alone as I thought. I was cleaning the bathroom, and when I lifted the heavy ceramic lid of the toilet tank to check a leaky flapper, I saw a small plastic baggie taped to the underside. Inside was a single handwritten note that simply said, whispering. I figured it was a remnant from the previous owners. Maybe some weird internal joke or a reminder for a medication schedule. I tossed it in the trash and went back to my boxes. But the atmosphere of the house started to shift after that. You know that feeling when you're in a room and you just know someone is standing behind you. It was like that constantly. I'd be working in the kitchen and feel a cold draft, or I'd hear the faint sound of a floorboard settling in the next room. It was a particularly rainy Tuesday when things took a turn for the truly unsettling. I had gone to the grocery store specifically because I was out of milk. I remember distinctly looking at the empty carton before I left. When I got back and opened the fridge to put the new one in, there was a fresh, unopened half-gallon of milk sitting right there on the middle shelf. I stood there for a good 30 seconds, just staring at it. I live alone. I don't have a girlfriend. My parents live 3 states away, and I hadn't given a spare key to anyone yet. I checked the pantry, thinking maybe I was losing my mind, and that's when I saw it. Taped to a box of cereal was another note. It said, "You always forget the essentials." I didn't call the police right then. I know. Looking back, it seems like the obvious choice. But I convinced myself that the landlord must have come by to check on the leak I'd mentioned, saw I was out of milk, and did a weirdly overfamiliar favor. It was a stupid thought, but I wanted to feel safe in my new home. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with a baseball bat, watching the front door. Nothing happened. No one came. The next morning, I went to the local hardware store and bought the most expensive deadbolt they had. I installed it myself, feeling a momentary sense of relief as the bolt clicked into place. I went to the kitchen to make coffee, feeling like I had finally reclaimed my space. As I reached for a mug, I noticed something white stuck to the inside of the new deadbolt I had just installed 5 minutes ago. It was a tiny scrap of paper, whispering, "Nice try." My heart nearly stopped. I was standing right there. I hadn't left the room. I hadn't even turned my back for more than a minute. I realized then that whoever was doing this wasn't coming in through the front door. They were already here. They were inside the house with me. I grabbed my phone and ran for the exit, but as I reached for the handle, I heard a sound that made my blood turn to ice. It wasn't coming from the hallway or the basement. It was coming from directly beneath my feet. The sound of a heavy latch being thrown. I froze, scared. My bedroom was just down the hall, and I realized I had left my car keys on the nightstand. I needed those keys. I crept toward the bedroom, my breath coming in shallow hitches, in a hurry tone. Every muscle in my body was screaming at me to just run out the door and never look back, but I felt like I was in a trance. I reached the bedroom door and pushed it open. The room was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. My bed, a heavy queen-sized frame, had been pushed about 6 inches to the left. Underneath where the bed usually sat, a section of the hardwood flooring had been cut into a perfect square. It was a trapdoor I hadn't noticed because of the rug, and the rug was now folded back. I reached the bed and grabbed my keys, but as I turned to leave, I saw a hand. A pale, thin hand reached up from the darkness of the hole and gripped the edge of the floorboards. Then a face followed. It wasn't a monster. It was a man. He looked to be in his 50s, with deep-set eyes and a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in years. He looked satisfied. He stared at me with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. "You're late today," he whispered. I didn't stay to hear anything else. In a hurry tone, I bolted. I didn't even close the front door. I jumped into my car and backed out of the driveway so fast I clipped the trash cans. I drove straight to the police station, my hands shaking so hard I could barely keep the car on the road. When the officers arrived at the house 20 minutes later, the trapdoor was closed. The bed had been moved back to its original position. If it hadn't been for the scratches on the floorboards, I think they would have thought I was having a mental breakdown. They searched the house and eventually found the entrance to a crawl space behind the water heater in the basement. It led to a narrow, finished room directly beneath my bedroom. Disgusted, it was a living area. There was a sleeping bag, dozens of notebooks, and a small battery-powered monitor that was linked to 4 hidden cameras he had installed in my house. One was in the kitchen, one was in the living room, one was in the bathroom, and the last one, whispering, the last one was inside the smoke detector directly above my bed. The police found logs dating back 3 years. He had been living under that house through 2 different sets of tenants. He knew their schedules, their habits, their favorite foods. He wasn't a burglar. He was a silent roommate. He'd wait for them to leave for work, then he'd come up, use the kitchen, watch their TV, and even sleep in their beds while they were out. The notes he left for me were his way of training me. As he put it in his journal, he wanted a tenant who was more predictable. The scariest part, the police found a set of my house keys in his pocket, but they weren't copies. They were my original keys. He had taken them from my pockets while I was asleep on my first night there, and replaced them with identical-looking fakes he'd already prepared. They never caught him. He had heard me screaming and fled through a secondary exit that led into the crawl space of the neighbor's house, which was fortunately empty at the time. I sold the cottage 2 months later at a significant loss. I couldn't spend another night there knowing how easily someone could be watching from the shadows. Now I live in a modern apartment building on the 12th floor. It has concrete floors and no crawl spaces. But even now, every time I hear a floorboard creak or find something slightly out of place in my kitchen, my heart skips a beat. Sometimes I still check the underside of my toilet tank lid. I'm always terrified of what I might find. And that's where the story ends. See you in the next episode. Don't forget to subscribe.